TRUTALK, a podcast from TruLand Equipment, where community, farming, and John Deere technology collide.
What's new in agriculture, what's happening in your neighborhood, and most importantly, who are the people that make it all happen?
TRUTALK, cultivating true conversations. Welcome back to the TRUTALK podcast. Jackson Lyons, how you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you, Josh, on this
good.
Not so nice afternoon compared to last time we were recording a podcast? Right. It was really pretty nice out for February. Now, I did say I wanted it colder, but now it's like terrible. Yeah. We got some more snowfall. Roads were pretty bad this morning.
Yeah, they were bad. It's just ironic that you bring that up. That was on my mind, too, that we sat here and talked about how beautiful the weather was last time we recorded a podcast. And now winter made its return, which we kind of expected, is what it is, right?
Well, expected and, like I mentioned, kind of needed, really. Right. I think if it had stayed above freezing or kind of warm for the rest of the winter timeline, it probably wouldn't have been doing us a big favor. We actually needed it to cool down again, freeze.
Like you said, we had field boundaries to do, and that's been the conversation with a couple coworkers today. I think we can get our boundary machines out and going now. So
for sure,
this is our I want to say first agronomy kind of crop talk of the season. We don't have any crops in the fields yet, but thought it'd be a good time to talk about maybe preparing for that upcoming season. What some of the hot topics are. So you were going to bring that up, and that's a great thing. Right off the bat, let's talk about winter. We had a hard winter. Right? We had snow. We had super cold temperatures.
Lots of below zero.
And I have been honestly ecstatic about it because I think winter is important for us in our ecosystem where we're at. A lot of reasons for that. Let's just say there's a lot of myths with snow and freezing in winter as well. Let's address that one first, and that's insects.
Yeah.
Okay. Insects are incredibly hardy. They go through a period of what's called diapause, and not to get too deep in the weeds, but they hibernate, right? Mm-hmm. And they have an amazing way to almost like they pump a little almost insect-made antifreeze through their body. Like the incredible job they are to survive that winter. So it's very likely that a hard winter is going to cut our insect population down a little bit just because, there may be some that couldn't get to hibernation phase or just a sheer numbers game. But the reality is insects typically tend to be pretty hardy to get through winter. But again, I don't think a hard winter is going to hurt, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not. We definitely know that a mild winter can lead to some other issues from insects and weeds and things like that. So I'm going to say a hard winter is going to be our friend on that front. But they're typically pretty hardy. What usually gets insects if you have a warming up period after a hard winter and they come out of their hibernation and then it freezes again. That's when you can
you catch them before they can make that transition.
Right. They're probably not going to go back into hibernation again. So that's typically when we'd see those numbers decrease significantly. So I'm a big advocate of winter. We've gone through probably 2 years or so or maybe even 3 years with really not a lot of winter activity that I would say, those really cold temperatures. And like we said last podcast, we've had a snow for almost 3 months on the ground, right? So
maybe you already head in this direction too, because you had already talked a little bit about the upcoming wheat crop and getting out and taking a look at that as we're coming out of the winter months, at least internally you did. And you mentioned, like a lot of people mention, that snow cover does a really good job of insulating that wheat, that crop, whatever it is.
Snow is a godsend for wheat, particularly when we have really, really cold temperatures like we had this year. So we are pushing kind of towards that time where wheat's going to start greening up a little bit. Thought we'd have it a little sooner, but we've turned back into winter again, which is fine. So we'll probably see that as we get into March. But yeah, I always send a little blurb out every year about assessing wheat crop and what's it look like coming out of a hard winter. You always want to make sure we look for what we call winter kill, which is self-explanatory, right? Looking for heaving. If you had fields that got frosted real bad and didn't have the insulation with the snow cover, they might have had some frost heave and you'd have some exposed roots and things. You could lose some plants like that. But typically you're going to go out and just assess that plant health and make sure everything's still firmly in the ground. Make sure we didn't have any plants die, but I always caution to people to make sure you go out and do that after that wheat greens up because wheat can look really rough when you're looking at it and it hasn't come out of dormancy yet. But when it starts to green up, it can change pretty quick. So,
And is that like a similar situation if you're looking at like a forage, like a hay crop or something like that?
I'd say most of those should be well established, right? Wheat's something you plant in the fall, so you're hoping it gets rooted pretty well. And forages, typically you're going to see they're established well enough and have deep roots that you're not going to have some of those issues with with some of the shallow rooted stuff. But of course, it's always good to check them out
Yep.
after winter. But like I said, snow's our friend when it comes to the winter wheat crop. Another thing, again, kind of bouncing back and forth here, but we've always thought that hard winters can be a compaction, can help with compact. So typically, water is the great temperature regulator.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of got to understand if a soil's dry, it's going to freeze quicker. It seems silly, right? Because you think of water freezing and ice, but water also has a tendency to regulate temperature, right? And insulate that soil. So water can keep soil cool in the spring, but it can also keep it a little bit warmer in the fall when winter comes, right? If you got some moisture, it helps regulate that temperature. But typically, drier soil is going to freeze faster and deeper first. And then in our area, typically our winters aren't quite harsh enough to get real deep in terms of the freezing and thawing, helping compaction. Usually it's kind of more like just a topsoil
effect.
Yeah. So we were pretty dry coming into winter. So probably helped a little bit, some of the shallower soils per se, but probably I don't think it's the miracle that everybody thinks it is.
Maybe also to try not to go back and forth near as much, but I'm going to go a little bit back and forth maybe. You mentioned came in dry, but how does that, when we had this thaw, when everything started melting, when we had that 6, 8, 10 inches of snow and that melted because we were dry,
right.
What does that do for our soil conditions as far as moisture? Because that all soaks in, doesn't it? It's not like a rain effect where it could run off.
It does.
It's taking all that in.
We are dry.
Yeah.
We're very dry.
Yep.
And even though we've had
lots of snowfall,
and you'd think, hey, we're going to replenish 10 inches. So we probably had 10 inches of snow this winter.
Yeah.
Totally.
For sure.
Probably even a little bit more than that when it came to. So we've probably had a couple inches of rain over the past 3 months, which is not a lot.
Is very minimal.
Right. So tiles aren't running. We've had some guys already dig down and say 4 foot down. We were pretty dry. And tiles typically don't run in the winter anyway, but again, it doesn't hurt, right? I would take 10 inches of snow over no snow.
Well, right, because if you think about it, like you said, the past couple of years we've had really mild winters,
right.
And I still don't think that we had a lot of precipitation regardless, right? They've been kind of dry, mild winters in general.
Right.
So that snowfall is kind of welcomed, I'd say.
Yep. Though for me, it definitely was. So no, I'm definitely a fan of winter. And again, if everybody complains about it and says, hey, I'm ready for this to be over, and I'm just smiling and say, hey, we need it. We are in an area that needs to have winter.
Yeah, well, right? I'd agree. I think it's a natural part of that cycle. It needs to be cold. We need to have snow, precipitation during winter to have a successful coming next season.
That's right. I think it's good for our ecosystem, and where we live is an area that should have winter. So, and here we are, man. So it's almost over. Right, we've had a little second winter again, which we said is fine. So
yep, no, it's good. So yeah, right. So the theme, like we talked about in our prior podcast, is get the planter out of the barn, right?
Out of the barn.
So we're preparing for planting season. Obviously,
yep.
We're making our list. We need to start checking that stuff off. What do we need to look at
from an agronomic standpoint? Okay, there's a couple things we've talked about wheat. Right, we want to assess that wheat crop. It's going to green up sometime soon in the next couple of weeks. We'll just assume that's the case. And then we start moving to termination of cover crops. I usually want to talk about that this time of year. That's one of the things, the guys that want to go out and kill those cover crops, the guys that use cover crops are going to most of them want to terminate that cover crop before planting. Some guys want to plant into it. I get that, and they'll terminate it afterwards. But that's something that we want to remember. A few tidbits, right? Make sure we're keeping our gallons per acre up in the spray solution. We want to spray a cover crop that's actively growing. It's easier to kill a weed when it's growing than when it's dormant, right? We know that. So if it's actively growing, it's going to take in its chemical. Make sure we know what we're going after out there. Make sure we have the right products and the right rates. And again, coverage is good. Adjuvants, ammonium sulfates, and surfactants, if you need those, please don't skimp on those, because again, you're spraying something in what's probably going to be a little bit cooler conditions. We want to give those chemicals every chance we can to work. So that's probably one of them. Obviously, we're getting into, we talked in our last podcast a little bit about just the technology and the return on investment, the fact that fertilizer is pretty expensive this year. We're going to be looking for ways to attack this crop in the most efficient way. Banding fertilizer, row starters are always a welcome addition in corn when you have, when things are a little bit tight and you want to be as efficient as possible. We want to band our fertilizers, row starters, and side dressing and things like that are the best ways to get a bang for the buck, and things to keep in mind, right? I mean, coming out of fall, fertilizer was very, very expensive, and I think a lot of guys wanted to hold off on putting fertilizers on just from a cost standpoint. And I think they've come down a little bit from what I've seen, but it's time to make that decision. You know, what are we going to do? What are we going to use? Let's go the most efficient way we can. So again, banding, row starters, side dressing. Anytime you can band your fertilizers, you're going to be much more efficient and help shave a few dollars there. So it's one thing.
So, and I'm kind of going maybe again not quite in sequence or order here, but I've got my Farmer's Almanac for the year of 2026.
Great, love it.
I thought that was always been a common theme. I liked that as a common theme. So, according to our Farmer's Almanac, spring of 2026 is supposed to be a sloth-like spring ahead. So it says spring, first day of spring officially is March 20th, but it's telling us that we're not going to have all that heat. It's going to be kind of cool, kind of, it's going to be wet. It's going to be cool, but we won't have the heat. That kind of seems like, I don't know what the Farmer's Almanac said last year, but I think last year we had a bit of that where we had a window that opened up and then it closed and became really cool.
Yeah, if you think about last year, we had really fantastic planting conditions pretty early.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, early is a relative term, I guess, but to me it was pretty early. But then we did have that cooling off period. And if you remember right, we had a lot of herbicide. I'm going to use the word stress. Again, I don't want to say damage or injury. I'm going to say herbicide stress. And that was strictly because we started getting cool and cloudy, and that particularly on soybeans, they had a real hard time kind of digesting some of those early soil applied herbicides. So yeah, you're right. It got a really nice warm planting window that kind of cooled off and got cloudy and cool for a while. And then it turned back around again. So you're saying we're going to have a slow, sloth-like spring, which means
the Farmer's Almanac.
No, I think it's pretty gospel.
Yeah, well, I mean, according to the 25-26 winter forecast, it was snow, rain, and everything in between. And for our area, it was very cold and snowy, is what it said.
Nice.
So it doesn't sound like it's too far off.
I nominate you the official Farmer's Almanac reader for this podcast.
I knew I didn't do my homework. I shouldn't be saying that, but I didn't do my homework very well because I should have leafed through this a little bit better to find some more interesting tidbits. But
I love it.
I had that. So
according to the Almanac, we're going to have a kind of a cool, wet, probably late March, and it's going to be a little slow going to get into the fields early. So we may not have an early planting.
We won't really know until the time comes, but like if we wanted to maybe halfway prepare for that, and we want to think more about planting dates later planting dates, kind of maybe like some of our eastern territory had last year. What would you say? Like, was there anything you would do different? You just let it go.
Yeah,
just let it happen.
Yep, not yet. Nope. You don't want to make those changes until you absolutely have to. I think a lot of people have keyed in on some really good genetics and corn and soybean varieties. So yeah, we probably wouldn't worry about making those changes until we get to the end of May. So we're gonna have faith that it's not gonna get to that point this year. But it does bring up a good point. This is a subject that I've kind of wrote a little tidbit on as well this year, is soybean planting, and kind of advising guys to make sure maybe we pay a little bit more attention to the 24 to 48 hour weather forecast after you plant soybeans. Okay. Most people may not realize, but the soybean seeds will absorb water and what we call imbibe within the first 6 hours of being planted in the ground. So if you plant soybeans within soil that has any moisture at all, they're going to start swelling within that first 6 hours, okay, which is pretty darn quick. What we don't want is a very, very cold weather event in that first 24 hours after planting soybeans. Because what happens if those soybeans swell and then that ground gets really, really, really cold and into freezing temperatures, it can actually injure that soybean seed and significantly reduce your soybean stand. So it's nothing new, but it's kind of been a point of emphasis. Ironically, I had written a little article on it, and then I saw in my email yesterday that Prairie Farmer put an article out.
How they copycats.
Well. And it was the same thing, talking about paying attention to your short-term forecast for soybean planting. So corn's not quite the same. Obviously, you want to plant in as good of conditions as we can. And I think looking at that short-term weather outlook is always a good idea. To me, that you don't want the cold, heavy rains, right? You don't want that. They tend to make that soil hard and compressed and make it awfully hard for corn or soybeans to emerge, right, and push through that tight soil. But typically soybeans, really want to encourage guys to just pay attention to that 24 to 48 hour forecast outlook when you're planting soybeans. And if you look like you're going to have a really, really cold spell or a really, really cold temperature drop and cold rain coming in, you probably want to hold off planting soybeans that day if it's coming in that night.
Yeah, and so I think there's like another point I was going to ask, maybe almost myth. Of course, the day that you're planting is important, yes, but sometimes I feel like, and that timeline's important, but sometimes I feel like the window, that planting window, we'll call it, the days leading up to, or more like the days after planting that plant, is almost more indicative or more important than the day that you plant on.
Right.
Say
Right.
the conditions are perfect
Yep.
on that day that you plant, but then like we had that 2 weeks or that week and a half or whatever it was, where cold, wet, not conducive for emergence of a crop. Is that true? Would you rather look at that
100%.
window more than just the day you plant?
You have to. It's funny. There's been a lot of people who've really struggled to make a decision on the day of. Hey, I think there's some rain potentially coming in. The old adage, I had a guy that always used to tell me, if it's going to rain within 2 days of planting your crop, don't plant your crop.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends on the calendar, right? But typically, when you're in April, a rain that's going to come is going to be a cold rain,
Right.
and we don't like cold rains early because they make the soil tight. I'm convinced that they pack it, make it tighter. They help pop air bubbles out of the soil. And if you think about the way air moves in hot temperatures and cold temperatures, right? When you're compressing cold soil, you're compressing those air bubbles out and basically turning it into concrete in a way. So no, you're right. I mean, I've got a good friend who he and his wife every year will battle back and forth whether they should plant on a certain day.
Yeah.
And guess who's usually right?
Who's that?
Which one do you think, the husband or the wife?
Oh no.
There's a right answer here, Jackson.
Should I? The husband.
Oh, I wasn't ready for my soundboard on that one.
But
No.
would you have lined up for me? See, I said there you go. I was
So I'm going to ask you again. Husband and wife are usually battling every year on, and they're good friends of mine, on whether they should plant on a certain day because rain's coming in.
I see what you're saying now. The wife.
When she says, "Hey, why don't we wait?"
Mm-hmm.
She's usually right.
The voice of reason.
I think he's learned that instead of getting the wrath, that he's so well deserved, he's finally started to listen. So
Sure.
that's a great point. I mean, again, it's really hard to shut a planter down when you start planting.
Yeah, well,
especially if you got a lot of ground to cover.
And I get it, and I of course, it's not to say that it's not important to have good planting conditions when you're planting,
Right.
but like you said, I feel like the window is almost more crucial.
It's just as important.
Yeah.
So,
And I've seen, and again, I'm not an agronomist, but like last year I saw the differences between some of the crops that were planted early and some of the crops that were planted a little bit later. And those later crops, granted, they didn't get off to the same kind of start. They didn't have the same amount of growing degree days, GDUs or whatever. But like by whatever mark it was during the year, it almost looked like a better crop. It had caught up. It caught up way quick, right? Yep. So it almost behooves you to plant early. Maybe not. Maybe we're getting way down in the rabbit hole.
So I have a rule of thumb, and if you're going to plant early, don't plant early in subpar conditions.
Right. Yeah. It has to be the perfect condition to get early.
And we say early, we're talking basically before April 20th, even the first half of April, maybe. If you're going to plant early, don't plant in conditions that are subpar. It's a double-edged sword. Not only are you risk because of the calendar date, right, and potential weather coming in, don't put seed in soil that's not fit and ready.
You got to set yourself up for success at that point.
Right. So that's kind of the first rule of thumb. And then I'm with you. I mean, start paying attention to that 48-hour outlook, particularly with soybeans. I think soybeans, the first 24 hours is super, super critical, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of research and data that can show that. So that's been a hot topic of the year. And I think a lot of us go to some winter trainings and classes and get our credits and things like that. And that was kind of a popular topic. So the only other thing on my mind, and this is something that I think, again, just kind of some preparedness, is just kind of understanding our disease profile in our area heading into the year. So we've beat tar spot like a dead horse, and we still will, and we'll talk about it all season as well. That's here, and it's here to stay. Last year in corn, we had southern rust.
That's right.
Come in. So southern rust is different from common rust. Common rust we have all the time, and we typically don't worry about it. Southern rust is a little bit different animal, and we usually have what I would call a southern rust presence, or even an epidemic, maybe every 10 years. It's got to that particular disease does not overwinter in our area. Okay, it's a leaf disease, but it comes up from the south. And if you remember our weather patterns last year, we had a lot of rainfall coming up from the Gulf area.
Correct.
So with that comes their diseases typically, and we had very, very hot summer last year, and southern rust loves heat. So it blew in, it was hot, it was the perfect storm, play on words, right? for southern rust, but typically because it needed such heat, tar spot doesn't like that heat. So tar spot kind of held off a little bit. So we got a nice little southern rust kind of, I don't want to use the word epidemic, but it was pretty heavy and pretty widespread in a lot of areas. And and then so it kind of established itself, and then we finally cooled off a little bit, towards August, I would say late August, and then the tar spot fired up, right? Because it cooled off a little bit. So we had an interesting scenario last year. I don't anticipate, and you just don't know, but I mean, typically you don't anticipate southern rust to be a problem 2 years in a row. So I think we go into the season not necessarily expecting that, but just keeping an eye out for when it comes to diseases, particularly in corn. We want to know what our conditions are, what are we favorable for, and then we've got some great websites and great resources out there to help kind of track diseases. If they're being spotted in certain counties and certain states, they're going to put that on the map, and you can kind of track the movement of where everything's at. So, and southern rust is on there, tar spot is on there, gray leaf spot should be on there as well. So, I'm saying we're going to go into the 2026 season with a pretty open slate, kind of expecting to see tar spot again. Probably not expecting to see southern rust, but it's all about weather patterns and conditions, and there's some predictability there, right? If you have certain weather patterns and temperatures and things like that. So
it just seems like tar spot won't go away for a long time.
It overwinters here.
It'll be around.
Yeah, they when it first became a problem, they said it wasn't going to overwinter here, but it didn't take long to figure out that was not the case. So so again, clean slate, but go into it with use your resources, scout your stinking crops, like walk your fields.
Yeah, right.
And on soybeans, another one I'm kind of thinking of here too is just it's become more and more popular last 2 years. I saw it quite a bit last year. Was something called red crown rot on soybeans. So red root crown rot. So it kind of looks like it sounds, meaning you're going to dig up the soybeans. If you think you got some disease stress, you're going to look for that reddish cast on the roots. So again, it's kind of a southern disease that we typically hadn't seen for a while. So it's kind of ironic. We're noticing it got heavier the year we got a lot of southern rust.
Yeah.
Coincidence? Maybe soybean diseases are typically soil borne. So, that whereas the rust can blow in and get on the leaves, the soybean diseases live in the soil. So that tells me that it's probably overwintering here, and it's going to be here to stay as well. So
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, some people diseases are pretty boring to talk about, but to me, it's a big part of our crop management kind of cycle every year. And
it's indicative of whether you're going to have a good crop or not.
Right.
I mean, it's so easy to see tar spot or something else come in and just totally wipe out your yield potential.
Yep.
In my mind, no brainer to get out there, like you said, scout your fields, look at it, because that's the other thing. The only way you can treat it is by knowing you have it, and then taking correct actions, whether it's preventative actions or what, to mitigate that risk to your crop.
So I mean, with something like the red crown rot, I mean, it's like I said, it's probably here to stay. So my gut says we're gonna start having some soybean variety screenings. Well, it's changes and screenings to know kind of, hey, this is kind of lines that are a little bit more tolerant of it and resistant to it, and that'll be kind of the next step, is starting to select our soybeans based on their ability to handle that disease. So look, when new diseases come in, you got to find ways to manage them. I mean, tar spot, we've kind of just accepted it's here to stay, and now we pretty much plan on it and manage it. And to me, it's more of just kind of watching the progress and the status of where you think it is, and get your fungicide timing right, at the right timing if you're going to try to get by with one spraying. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're sitting here kind of, like I said, waiting for things to warm up a little bit, waiting for our wheat crop to kick in and
get rolling. I was going to say, I don't have anything else now except for waiting for a crop to get in the ground and wait for it to come up, and then there'll be plenty to talk about, right?
Yep, I agree. So okay, the almanac says spring like a sloth.
You heard it here first, folks.
If there's anything you want to take away from this podcast, is that spring's going to come in like a sloth. So every year is different, my man.
That's right.
And now you've got me kind of excited to see what shakes out. So
perfect.
We'll see what's happening.
All right.
We'll catch you next time.
See you guys.